The monitor wasn't beeping. It was screaming. A flat, continuous tone that cut through the noise of the rain hammering against the metal roof of the clinic. Taryn didn't look at the screen. She didn't look at the clock. Her hands were already moving, locked together over the woman's chest, driving down hard. 1, 2, 3. The ribs under her palms felt too fragile, like dry branches ready to snap. There was no rhythm in the room except for Taryn's own breathing and the wet, sleek sound of the storm outside. The trauma bay was cold. It always was. They couldn't afford to heat the back rooms of the clinic, not this far out in the county. The woman on the table was soaked through, her clothes dark with mud and oil. She looked like she had been dragged out of a river or thrown into one. Taryn pushed again. Harder. Come on, she whispered. It wasn't a prayer. It was an order. 30 seconds passed. The line on the monitor remained a stubborn, horizontal green streak. Taryn paused for a micro-second to check the airway. That's when she saw it. It was a small detail, something that shouldn't have been there. Beneath the grime on the woman's neck, just below the jawline, the skin wasn't pale like the rest of her. It was textured, a faint, grid-like pattern of scarring. It looked surgical, precise. It wasn't the kind of scar you got from a car wreck or a bar fight. It looked like something had been removed carefully and recently. It didn't make sense. This woman was wearing boots that were falling apart and a jacket that looked like it had been salvaged from a dumpster. But that scar spoke of expensive, specialized attention. Taryn pushed the thought away. Doubt was a luxury. Oxygen was a necessity. She resumed compressions. Charging. A voice drawled from the doorway. Dr. Verick leaned against the frame, looking bored. He held a tablet in one hand, scrolling through something that definitely wasn't a patient chart. He didn't move toward the table. He didn't grab the paddles. He just watched Taryn sweat. She's gone, Taryn, Verick said, not looking up from his screen. State troopers said she was unresponsive when they found her in the ditch. Don't waste the epinephrine. We're low on stock as it is. Taryn didn't stop. She has a shockable rhythm. I saw a flutter. You saw interference from the storm. Verick sighed, finally stepping into the room. He walked over, not to the patient, but to the monitor. He reached out to turn down the volume of the alarm. Time of death. No? Taryn said. She didn't shout. She didn't look at him. She just didn't stop. She grabbed the ambu bag with one hand, squeezing air into the woman's lungs, and went back to compressions with the other. It was sloppy, desperate mechanics, but she was the only one in the room willing to move. Verick rolled his eyes. He checked his watch, visibly annoyed that his break was being interrupted by a corpse. He turned his back to the table, walking toward the sink to wash his hands, as if the very air around the poor woman was dirty. He didn't see it. He didn't see the woman's hand twitch. It was a small motion, just the index finger of her left hand tapping against the metal rail of the gurney, once, twice. Rhythmic. Taryn saw it. She froze. The monitor hiccuped. A spike. Then another. A chaotic, ugly rhythm, but a rhythm. She's back. Taryn breathed. She grabbed the oxygen mask, sealing it over the woman's face. BP is rising. Verick, I need a line. Verick turned around, blinking. He looked at the monitor, then at the woman, then at Taryn. He didn't look relieved. He looked irritated that he had been wrong. He stepped forward, pushed Taryn aside with his hip, and checked the woman's pupils. Pupils sluggish, Verick announced loudly, his voice changing into his doctor tone, now that there was a pulse. Let's get her stabilized. I want a tox screen immediately. If she's another overdose, I want her out of here before the shift change." He began barking orders for fluids and meds, listing things Taryn had already prepared on the tray behind him. Taryn moved silently, handing him the catheter, the tape, the saline. She anticipated his hand movements before he made them. When the woman's breathing finally evened out, Verick stepped back, wiping his brow as if he had run a marathon. He picked up the chart. "Good save," he muttered to the empty room. He wrote something down, signed it with a flourish, and walked out. He didn't look at Taryn. He didn't acknowledge that 5 minutes ago he had tried to call the time of death. Taryn stood by the gurney, invisible. She adjusted the blanket over the woman, tucking it around her shoulders. She brushed a strand of wet, muddy hair away from the woman's forehead. That's when she saw the eyes open. They weren't groggy, they weren't confused. They were clear, grey, and absolutely terrifying. The woman looked at Taryn, then shifted her gaze to the door where Verick had exited, then back to Taryn. She didn't speak. She just raised a finger to her lips. Taryn didn't ask questions. In her 15 years working the graveyard shift at the edge of the county, she had learned that silence was often safer than the truth. She gave a microscopic nod, barely a dip of her chin. The woman on the gurney let her eyelids drift shut, but the tension in her jaw remained tight, like a coiled spring. The storm outside threw a fresh wave of water against the glass, rattling the frames. The clinic felt like a submarine taking on pressure. Taryn moved to the sink, peeling off her gloves. Her hands were shaking. She hid them by gripping the edge of the counter, the cold porcelain biting into her skin. She had done compressions 100 times, but this felt different. It felt like she had just resuscitated a ghost. She walked back to the bedside to change the IV bag. Her movements were automatic, efficient. She checked the woman's vitals. The heart rate was steady now, a strong, slow thrum in the 60s. Taryn reached down to remove the ruined, caked boots. They were heavy, steel-toed, and worn down at the heels. As she pulled the left boot free, a clump of red clay fell to the linoleum. It was the wrong color. The soil around the clinic, and for 50 miles in every direction, was dark, loamy black dirt. Red clay belonged to the uplands 3 counties over, near the restricted training grounds. Taryn paused. She looked at the mud, then at the woman's face. The woman was breathing evenly, feigning sleep, but Taryn saw the rapid movement of her eyes beneath the lids. She was tracking the sounds in the hallway. The intercom on the wall buzzed, static scratching the air. "Taryn," Verick's voice crackled, distorted and impatient. "Deputy Cale is here for the report. He says dispatch got a call about a vagrant causing trouble at the gas station before she collapsed. Just give him the basics so he can clear out. I don't want wet uniforms dripping in my hallway." The woman on the bed went perfectly still. It wasn't the stillness of sleep. It was the stillness of a predator hiding in tall grass. The door swung open before Taryn could answer. Deputy Cale stepped in, bringing the smell of wet wool and stale tobacco with him. He was a big man, heavy around the middle, with a face that looked like it had been kneaded out of dough and left to rise too long. He took off his hat, slapping it against his thigh, sending a spray of rainwater across Taryn's clean floor. "Night, Taryn," Cal grunted. He pulled a small notepad from his breast pocket. "Doc says she made it. Shame. Lots of paperwork for a Jane Doe." He walked up to the bed, looming over the patient. He didn't look at her with concern. He looked at her like she was a deer he had hit with his truck and now had to drag off the road. "Did she have ID?" Cale asked, clicking his pen. "No," Taryn said, stepping between Kale and the bed. It was a subtle move, blocking his line of sight to the woman's hands. Just the clothes on her back. Well, check her pockets again, Kale said, reaching out to lift the blanket. Maybe she stashed a needle or a pipe. As Kyle's hand moved toward the sheet, the heart rate monitor behind Taryn changed. Beep, 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 beep. Then, silence. The line flattened. The alarm didn't sound immediately. There was always a 3-second delay, but the numbers plummeted. 50, no. 30. Kale pulled his hand back, startled by the sudden drop in the audio pitch. What the hell? I thought you said she was stable. Taryn spun around to look at the screen. The heart rate was dropping artificially fast. It wasn't cardiac arrest. It looked controlled. She looked at the patient. The woman's face was slack, her breathing shallow and undetectable. She's crashing, Taryn lied. The words tasted like ash, but they came out smooth. Her BP is bottoming out. Carl, you need to leave. I need to work. I just need to print her prints, Carl argued, though he took a step back, looking at the monitor with distrust. Sheriff wants to know who she is. And I want her to not die on my shift, Taryn snapped. It was the first time she had raised her voice at an officer in years. She grabbed the crash cart handle and yanked it forward, creating a metal barrier between the deputy and the patient. Get out, Kyle. Go write your report in the lobby. KL hesitated. He looked at the woman, then at Taryn, his eyes narrowing. He didn't like being told what to do by a nurse, but the flatlining noise was making him nervous. Fine, Carl grumbled. He shoved his notebook back into his pocket. Let me know when she wakes up. If she wakes up. He turned and walked out, the heavy door clicking shut behind him. The moment the latch clicked, the monitor changed. Beep, beep, 70 beats per minute. Perfect sinus rhythm. Taryn stared at the screen, her own heart hammering against her ribs. She turned slowly to the woman. The patient opened her eyes. The grey irises were sharp, alert, and devoid of fear. Thank you, the woman whispered. Her voice was raspy, like she had swallowed smoke. You dropped your heart rate, Taryn said. It wasn't a question. On purpose. That's not possible. Biofeedback, the woman murmured. She tried to sit up but winced, clutching her side. Listen to me. You have to listen carefully. Taryn stepped closer. She saw the woman's hands now. They were trembling, not from cold, but from adrenaline withdrawal. The man who was just here, the woman said, her voice dropping to a harsh whisper. The deputy. He wasn't chewing gum. Taryn frowned. What? He was chewing wax, the woman said, to seal his molars. And his boots, they didn't squeak on the wet floor. Standard issue police boots squeak when they're wet. His didn't. Taryn felt a cold chill slide down her spine. Kale has been a deputy here for 20 years. I know him. You know the uniform. The woman corrected. That wasn't him. Taryn stepped into the hallway. The door clicked shut, sealing the trauma room behind her. The silence of the clinic was heavy, pressurized by the relentless drumming of the rain on the metal roof. She needed to prove the woman wrong. Paranoia was a symptom of shock, not a diagnosis. Kale was Kyle. Verick was lazy, not dangerous. She walked toward the vending machines at the far end of the corridor. Her rubber soles squeaked on the linoleum. Squeak. Squeak. The man in the tan uniform was standing there. He wasn't leaning. The real Kyle had a slipped disc. He always leaned against the wall, shifting his weight to his left leg to spare his back. This man stood with his weight perfectly distributed. His spine was a straight, vertical line. He put $1 into the machine. He didn't punch the buttons, he pressed them. B4. The coil turned. The bag of pretzels snagged, hanging by a corner. The real Kyle would have kicked the glass. He would have cursed the machine's mother. This man didn't move. He didn't blink. He stared at the hanging bag for 3 seconds, calculating. Then, he inserted a second bill. B4. The second bag pushed the first one free. Efficiency. No emotion. No wasted energy. Taryn felt a cold prickle of sweat on her neck. The woman was right. That wasn't Kyle. She backed away, keeping to the shadows, and slipped into the nurse's station. She picked up the black receiver of the landline to call the main switchboard. There was no dial tone, just a soft, rhythmic clicking. Click, click, click. The line wasn't dead. It was open. Someone was listening to the silence. She hung up gently, making sure the plastic didn't clack against the cradle. Her hands were trembling. She needed Verick. Even if he was incompetent, he was the doctor on charge. He had authority. She moved toward his office. The door was ajar. A sliver of yellow light spilling onto the dark floor. Verick was inside, his back to the door. He was gripping his cell phone, his knuckles white. "I don't have the file," Verick whispered. His voice was thin, reedy with panic. "You said this was a standard transport." "No, I haven't logged her name yet. Look, the nurse is asking questions." Taryn froze. "I can't keep them separated forever," Verick hissed. He listened for a moment, then slumped in his chair. "Fine. Just get the team here. I'll stall her, but I want the transfer cleared before they breach the door." He hung up. He didn't sound like a mastermind. He sounded like a man who had borrowed money from the wrong people and was now paying the interest with his soul. Taryn retreated. She didn't run. She walked backward, stepping in her own footprints until she reached the trauma room. She slipped inside and locked the door. It was a flimsy privacy lock, barely strong enough to stop a determined toddler, let alone whatever was coming. The woman on the gurney was sitting up. She had disconnected the leads. She was wrapping the blood pressure cuff around her ribs, pulling it tight as a makeshift brace. "You didn't call," the woman said. She didn't look at Taryn. She was focused on the knot she was tying. "The line is tapped," Taryn whispered. "And the doctor, he's waiting for a team. He said he has to stall me." The woman nodded. It was a grim, resigned motion. "Standard containment. Is there a back exit?" "Yes," Taryn said. "Through the break room, but the alarm is silent, wired to the station." "There is no station coming," the woman said. She slid off the table. Her legs shook, but she forced them to hold her weight. She looked at Taryn. "You need to go back out there. Sit at the desk. Do your paperwork. Pretend you see nothing." "What?" Taryn asked. "If you are in this room when they come in," the woman said, her gray eyes locking onto Taryn's, "you become part of the problem. If you are out there, you are just furniture. They ignore furniture." It was a valid offer, a chance to walk away, to be unseen, to let this stranger disappear into the rain and take the danger with her. Taryn looked at the door. Then she looked at the woman's hands, bruised, battered, but steady. "Verick said they're going to breach," Taryn said. "That doesn't sound like they're coming to talk." "They aren't," the woman confirmed. Taryn reached into her pocket. She didn't pull out keys. She didn't pull out a weapon. She pulled out a roll of medical tape. She walked to the door and taped the latch bolt down so it wouldn't click when it opened. "I'm not going out there," Taryn said quietly. "If I go out there, I leave you alone." The woman paused. She looked at the tape, then at Taryn. For a second, her guard dropped. She looked young, terrified but young. "You don't know who I am," the woman said. "You're my patient?" Taryn replied. "That's the only label that matters in this room." The lights in the clinic flickered. Once. Twice. Then they died completely. The hum of the refrigerator cut out. The ventilation system groaned and stopped. The silence that followed was absolute, heavy, and suffocating. They cut the power, the woman whispered in the dark. No, Taryn said, her voice trembling. We have a generator. It should kick on in 10 seconds. They waited. 10 seconds passed. 20. The darkness held. They cut the generator too, the woman said. She moved to the corner of the room, blending into the shadows. They aren't just cleaning up, they're sanitizing. The handle of the trauma room door jiggled. Gently at first, then with frantic force. Taryn. Verrick's voice came through the wood. It wasn't the voice of a doctor. It was the voice of a man standing on a ledge. Open the door. The deputy needs to see her. Taryn stood with her back pressed against the wood. Her shoulder blades dug into the frame. This was the fracture. For 15 years she had been a rule follower. She charted every aspirin. She reported every bruise. Now she was the wall. She's not decent, Taryn lied. The words felt heavy in her mouth. Give us 2 minutes. We don't have 2 minutes, Verrick shouted. He kicked the bottom of the door. The latch rattled, the tape holding it barely keeping the bolt from engaging. In the dark room, the woman slid off the gurney. She made no sound. Her boots touched the linoleum like falling leaves. She didn't look at the window. She looked at Taryn. You're making a mistake, the woman whispered. If you hold that door, you become an accomplice. I'm doing my job, Taryn hissed back, bracing her foot against the baseboard. You're my patient. No, the woman said. She stepped closer. In the gloom, her grey eyes were terrifyingly calm. I'm a target. And you're standing in the blast radius. The pounding on the door stopped. Silence. Then the heavy, muffled thud of a shoulder slamming against the wood. Thud. Taryn gasped as the impact vibrated through her spine. Thud. The wood around the lock splintered. Move away from the door, Verrick screamed. Taryn didn't move. She closed her eyes. She wasn't fighting for the woman anymore. She was fighting for the idea that her clinic was a sanctuary, not a slaughterhouse. She was breaking the law to uphold the oath. The woman behind her didn't help. She didn't grab a weapon. She didn't try to barricade the door. She did something worse. She vanished. Taryn felt a brush of air against her arm, a presence moving away, retreating into the deepest shadow of the room, near the ventilation shaft that hadn't been opened since 1990. Don't look at me, the woman's voice commanded. It came from everywhere and nowhere. When they enter, you saw nothing. You heard nothing. You were scared. Be scared, Taryn. It's the only thing that will save you. CRACK. The doorframe gave way. Taryn was thrown forward, stumbling to her knees. Light flooded the room. Not the soft clinic lights, but the blinding, focused beam of a tactical flashlight. Verrick stumbled in first. He was hyperventilating. He held a syringe in his hand. Not a weapon, but a sedative. His knuckles white around the barrel. Behind him stood the fake deputy. He didn't stumble. He flowed into the room. He swept the beam left, right, high, low. The beam hit the gurney. Empty. The sheets were ruffled, shaped like a body, but the woman was gone. The beam hit the window. Locked. Dust undisturbed on the sill. The beam hit Taryn. She shielded her eyes, cowering on the floor. Her heart hammered against her ribs like a trapped bullet. She waited for the bullet. She waited for the anger. Where is she? Verrick shrieked, spinning in circles. She was here. Taryn, you said she was here. Taryn looked up. She didn't have to act. The terror was real. She was? Taryn stammered. I was checking her vitals. The lights went out. I heard a noise. The fake deputy lowered the flashlight. He walked over to the ventilation grate in the corner. He ran a gloved finger along the screws. The dust was broken. He didn't open it. He didn't call for backup. He didn't yell. He stood up and looked at Taryn. For a long, agonizing 10 seconds, he dissected her. He looked at her trembling hands. He looked at her uniform, stained with the mud from the woman's boots. He looked at the lie sitting behind her eyes. He knew she had stalled. He knew she had bought the woman time. But he also saw something else. Taryn was nobody, a rural nurse, a civilian, a piece of background scenery that had accidentally gotten in the way. "Clear the room," the man said. His voice was calm, bored even, but Verick started. "She's gone, doctor," the man said. He holstered his flashlight. "The asset has extracted. We missed the window." He walked toward Taryn. He stopped 2 feet away. He smelled of rain and gun oil. "You have a very dangerous job, ma'am," he said softly. "Accidents happen in the dark. You should be more careful." He turned and walked out. Verick stood in the middle of the room, the syringe hanging uselessly at his side. He looked at Taryn. The realization of what she had done, what they had both done, settled between them like a toxic fog. "You let her go," Verick whispered. "Do you have any idea what you've done?" Taryn stood up. Her knees were water. She looked at the empty vent. She hadn't escaped. She hadn't run. She was still here in the clinic, trapped with a corrupt doctor and a killer who had decided she wasn't worth the bullet yet. The chain remained unseen, but Taryn could feel its weight around her neck. The silence that followed was worse than the violence. Verick was on his hands and knees. He wasn't praying, he was scrubbing. He had found a bottle of bleach under the sink and was pouring it raw onto the linoleum where the woman's boots had left mud. The smell of chlorine burned Taryn's throat, overpowering the metallic scent of adrenaline. "She wasn't here," Verick muttered. He didn't look up. His arm moved in a frantic, circular rhythm. "You understand that, Taryn. We had a quiet night. The storm knocked out the power. We played cards." Taryn stood by the counter. Her hands were shaking, but she clasped them together to hide the tremor. She looked at the empty gurney. The sheets were still warm. The indentation of the woman's body was still visible. "We can't just erase her," Taryn said softly. Verick stopped scrubbing. He looked up. His eyes were bloodshot, rimmed with a desperation that made him look 20 years older. "We aren't erasing her," Verick hissed. "We are surviving her." That man, the one with the flashlight, he didn't leave because he was done. He left because he gave us a grace period, a chance to align our stories. He stood up, wiping his bleach, soaked hands on his lab coat. He walked over to the tray where Taryn had set the blood samples she had drawn earlier. 2 vials, dark red. The only physical proof that a living, breathing human had been in that room. "Get rid of these," Verick ordered. He pointed to the biohazard incinerator chute in the wall. "Now." Taryn looked at the vials. She looked at Verick. "If I do that," Taryn said, "I'm not a nurse anymore. I'm a cleaner." "You're a cleaner who gets to go home to her cat," Verick said. His voice dropped. "Do it, Taryn, or neither of us walks out of here." Taryn picked up the vials. The glass was cold. She walked to the walled chute. She opened the heavy steel door. The heat from the furnace below wafted up, dry and hungry. She held the vials over the darkness. This was the fracture point. The moment the bone snaps. If she dropped them, she was safe. She was complicit, but safe. She looked at the label she had scribbled in haste. "Jane Doe, Yo 2:45 a.m. She didn't drop them. She reached into her pocket and pulled out 2 empty vials she kept for calibration. She tossed the empties down the chute. Clink, clink. She slammed the steel door shut. The sound echoed like a gunshot. She slid the real vials, the ones containing the DNA of the ghost, into the deep pocket of her scrub pants. It was a stupid, reckless act, a silent refusal to let the truth be incinerated. Don't. Taryn lied. She turned around. Varric exhaled. His shoulders sagged. He believed her because he needed to believe her. Good, he whispered. Good. He walked past her, out of the trauma room toward his office. I need to fix the logs. Go to the break room. Make coffee. Normalcy, Taryn. We need normalcy. Taryn didn't go to the break room. She went to the lobby. She needed space. She needed to see the rain, to assure herself the world outside still existed. She walked to the glass doors. The storm was finally breaking. The rain had slowed to a drizzle. The TV mounted in the corner of the waiting room was on. It was muted, playing the 24-hour news cycle. Taryn glanced at it. She froze. The banner at the bottom of the screen read TRAI men GSCID FMS LEF O of Decoro FICR. They were showing a photo. Formal dress blues. Stern, grey eyes that stared out of the screen with terrifying clarity. It was the woman. Taryn stepped closer, her breath fogging the air in front of her. The caption changed. Captain Callia Vance, deceased yesterday at 1400 hours. Taryn looked at the clock on the wall. It was 03:30 a.m. The woman she had spoken to, the woman whose blood was burning a hole in her pocket, had been declared dead 12 hours before she walked into the clinic. This wasn't a cover-up. It was a pre-written script. Behind her, the clinic door opened. Taryn spun around. It wasn't Varric. It was a courier. A young kid in a dripping poncho, holding a clipboard. He looked bored. He looked harmless. Delivery for Dr. Varric. The kid mumbled, shaking rain off his sleeve. Signature required. Taryn stared at him. At 3 in the morning. Priority dispatch. The kid shrugged. He held out a small, flat envelope. It was red. Taryn took the clipboard. She signed her name. Her hand was steady now. The fear had crystallized into something colder. The kid left. Taryn looked at the envelope. There was no return address, just a stamp in the corner. Department of Neveligntligncarchivdvcn. She felt the blood vial in her pocket press against her thigh. Varric walked into the lobby. He saw the envelope in her hand. He stopped dead. His face went pale, then grey. "Give me that," he whispered. He didn't grab it. He was too scared to touch it. "It says Archive Division," Taryn said. She didn't hand it over. Why is Naval Intelligence sending you mail in the middle of the night? Varric looked at the envelope, then at the news report on the screen behind her. He connected the dots. "It's not mail," Varric said. His voice was a dry rattle. "It's a severance package." Varric tore the red envelope open. The paper made a sharp, tearing sound that seemed too loud for the quiet lobby. He pulled out a single sheet of paper. It wasn't a letter. It was a form. A standard non-disclosure agreement, pre-filled with his name, attached to a bank draft. He stared at the number on the check. It was enough to pay off his debts. It was enough to disappear. "They aren't arresting us," Varric whispered. He looked at Taryn, his eyes hollow. "They're buying us out." "I'm not for sale," Taryn said. She could feel the 2 vials of blood in her pocket, heavy against her leg. They were warm now, heated by her own skin. "Everyone is for sale, Taryn," Varric said. He folded the check and slid it into his shirt pocket. He looked at the clinic door, then at the rain-slicked parking lot. "You should go home. Don't come back for your next shift. Don't come back for your things." He walked out. He didn't say goodbye. He didn't look back at the practice he had run for 20 years. He just walked into the mist and dissolved. Taryn stood alone in the lobby. The fluorescent lights hummed overhead, indifferent to the fact that the clinic had just died. She waited. She didn't know what she was waiting for. The police, the fake deputy, a bullet. Morning came slow and grey. The rain stopped, leaving a heavy, wet fog that clung to the windows. At 0800, a car pulled up. It wasn't a black SUV. It was a silver sedan with a rental sticker on the bumper. A woman in a grey suit stepped out. She carried a briefcase and a travel mug. She looked like a regional manager for a paper supply company. She walked in, shaking her umbrella. "Taryn Miller?" she asked, consulting a tablet.
"Yes,"
Taryn said. "I'm from the regional board," the woman said. She didn't offer a name. "We've had reports of a significant narcotic discrepancy in the logs last night, and a security breach regarding the rear exit." Taryn stared at her. There was a storm. The power went out. The logs show the safe was accessed at 0300 AM. The woman continued, not looking up. "And unauthorized personnel were on site. Dr. Verick has submitted his resignation effective immediately. He cited your negligence as a contributing factor. The betrayal was dry and bureaucratic. Verick hadn't just taken the money, he had signed the narrative that buried her." "I didn't steal anything," Taryn said. Her voice was steady, but her hands were fists at her sides. "We aren't pressing charges," the woman said, finally meeting Taryn's eyes. Her gaze was professional, bored, and completely empty. "But your employment is terminated. For cause. Your license will be flagged for review by the state board. I suggest you don't reapply in this county." 30 years, Taryn whispered. "I have worked in this building for 30 years. Please leave your badge on the desk," the woman said. She turned and walked toward Verick's office, already pulling out her phone to call a contractor. Taryn unclamped her badge. She looked at the photo. It was taken 10 years ago. She looked hopeful then. She placed the plastic rectangle on the counter. It made a small clack. She walked out. She didn't have a car. It was at the bottom of a ravine. She had to walk. The 3 miles to her small house felt like a funeral procession of one. The fog dampened the sound of her footsteps. Cars passed her, splashing water from the potholes. No one stopped. No one saw the nurse walking on the shoulder of the highway, shivering in her thin scrubs. She reached her front porch. Her key turned in the lock. The house smelled of stale coffee and old wood. It was silent. She went to the kitchen and turned on the small television on the counter. She needed noise. She needed to drown out the silence in her head. The news was still playing. Services for Captain Vance will be held at Arlington. The screen showed the funeral procession. It was live. The rain in D.C. looked just like the rain in her county. The camera panned to the front row. An older man stood there. He was tall, wearing a long black coat over a dress uniform. He had the same steel, grey eyes as the woman in the clinic. Admiral Vance. He didn't look like a grieving father. He looked like a man inspecting a fortification. He stood rigid, his face a mask of absolute control. Then the camera angle shifted. Taryn leaned closer to the screen. Behind the Admiral, standing in the shadow of a pillar, was a woman. She was wearing a wide, brimmed hat and dark glasses. She was dressed in civilian black, her arm in a sling. She wasn't part of the ceremony. She was watching it. Taryn froze. The woman tilted her head slightly, just a fraction of an inch, a gesture of acknowledgement to the empty coffin being lowered into the ground. It was her. Kalia. She wasn't dead. The funeral was the cover. The death was the exit strategy. Taryn realized then what had happened. She hadn't saved a soldier. She had facilitated a resurrection. The Admiral hadn't lost a daughter. He had moved a chess piece into the shadows. Taryn reached into her pocket. She pulled out the 2 vials. The blood was dark, separating now. Plasma and cells. She looked at the screen, then at the vials. She held the truth in her hand. The biological proof that Captain Vance was alive. That the funeral was a lie. That the government was lying to the world. She could go to the press. She could go to a lawyer. She looked at the Admiral on the screen. He turned, just for a second, and looked directly into the camera lens. It felt like he was looking into her kitchen. He knew she existed. He knew she had the vials. He had sent the woman in the grey suit to strip her of her job, her credibility, her voice. He had left her alive because she was too small to matter, as long as she stayed quiet. Taryn walked to the sink. She held the vials over the drain. This was the chain. It didn't pull you up. It held you down. She uncapped the first vial. The red liquid hit the white porcelain. It didn't look like a state secret. It didn't look like proof of life. It just looked like rust swirling down the drain with the tap water. Taryn watched it go. She didn't feel a sense of loss. She felt a strange, heavy release. The burden of being a witness was washing away, ounce by ounce. She uncapped the second vial. She poured it out. On the television screen, the Admiral was accepting a folded flag. His face was a fortress of stone. He didn't look like a man mourning a daughter. He looked like a man who had successfully moved a queen across a chessboard, sacrificing a pawn to save the game. Taryn was the pawn, and she had just cleared the board. She rinsed the vials. She crushed the glass in a towel and threw the shards into the trash. She turned off the TV. The silence that filled her kitchen wasn't empty anymore. It was solid. 3 months passed. The clinic remained closed. The county weeds grew tall around the "for sale" sign. Varick was gone. Rumor said he was running a dialysis center in Florida. Taryn didn't leave. She found work at a hospice on the other side of the ridge. It was quiet work. Palliative care. Holding the hands of people who were leaving, not trying to pull them back. She didn't ask questions. She didn't check pulses that weren't there. She became the furniture again. Reliable, invisible. One Tuesday, a letter arrived. It had no return address. The envelope was thick, expensive cream paper. Taryn opened it on her porch. The morning air was cold, smelling of pine and damp earth. The same smell as that night, but without the fear. Inside was a single object. It was her nursing license. The one the woman in the grey suit had flagged. The one that was supposed to be suspended. It was renewed. Valid for 10 years. Paperclipped to the back was a small, handwritten note. The handwriting was jagged, sharp, as if written by a hand that had been broken and reset. The rain has stopped. Thank you for holding the umbrella. There was no signature. Taryn looked at the card. She looked at the hills stretching out before her, silent and green. She realized then that the world wasn't held together by the people on the news. It wasn't held together by admirals or captains or speeches. It was held together by the people who locked the doors. By the people who cleaned the mud. By the people who saw the truth and chose to bury it, not because they were afraid, but because they understood the cost of peace. She pinned the license to her shirt. It felt lighter than before. She didn't need to be a hero. She didn't need a medal. She had been the link in the chain that didn't break. And that was enough. Thank you for listening to this story with me. If you believe that the quietest people often carry the heaviest loads, please consider sharing this story with someone who needs to hear it.